Hello again and welcome to the Tobago House of Assemblies Division of Education, Innovation and Energy e-learning program. My name is Kimarie Richardson Thomas and we are going to go through our CAPE communication studies with a specific emphasis today on our multiple choice paper. So we're going to look at some module 3 types of questions and we're looking at items 31 to 45 thereabouts, and again this can vary. When we get to module 3, speaking and writing, areas that you need to revise and go over involve the process of communication. We're looking at forms of communication and they can be verbal and non-verbal. Not that they can be, but they will be. Make sure you understand verbal and non-verbal forms of communication. We're talking about context of communication, types of speaking and writing, and organization skills or organizing skills for oral and written communication. So let's take, for example, you can be given a prompt like this. This prompt looks at the process of communication, and we have the first step being conceptualization, number 2, encoding, 3, selection of medium and channel, 4, decoding, 5 is blank in our prompt, and then 6 says feedback. Now when you look at a prompt like this and you identify that one of them is blank, you know that you're going to be asked a question that is going to require you to fill in that blank, or at least identify what should be able to fill that blank. So let's take a look at our questions. Stage 5 of the cycle illustrated above should be what? So let's go back to our cycle. Conceptualization has to do with your planning for your message. Encoding is putting your message together. Selection of the medium and channel, you're going to decide how are you going to send your message out. Once the message has gone out, decoding involves the recipient of the message being able to articulate and understand what it is was transmitted. Then we have 5 that's blank, and then we have 6, feedback. So what takes place between here and here? After you've decoded your information, how do you get from decoding to feedback? So is it that number 5 is distortion? Distortion talks about where there's a disruption in the information. We're not getting that. B, is it the creation of feedback? Let's look at it. C, transition. We know that there's a transition from our number 4, from decoding to feedback. But what is that transition? And is transition part of our process of communication? D, interpretation. Now, interpretation is part of our decoding process, so that we can see that stage 5 really involves the creation of feedback. So if you selected B, you would be correct. And again, remember, as we go along, you can take pictures of these to save for your revision later on. 32 says at stage 1 of the process, what takes place? Stage 1 of our process involves, and if we look at it here, it is the conceptualization. So this is a vocabulary type of question. It really requires you to be able to identify what is involved in conceptualization, what is conceptualization, and what takes place at that stage of our communication process. So stage 1, is it the information is communicated? B, the information to be sent is defined? C, the message is created? Or D, the message is interpreted? The conceptualization process is what takes place before you've actually created the message. You want to be able to understand what it is you're going to do and how you're going to do it before you do it. And that is what conceptualization involves. So stage 1, the information is communicated. We've not gone here yet. The information to be sent is defined. And yes, this is what conceptualization is. You're defining what it is you want to say and how you plan to say it. The message is created? No. This has to do with actually, this one here has to do with encoding it. You're creating it, putting it together. And D, the message is interpreted. No. This has to do with decoding your message. So our answer here is B. Now let's take a look at a prompt that you can also get for your multiple choice. And very often you can get some of these that may be a type of cartoon. And what we have taken place here, we have a character, and for those of you who are familiar with cartoons, this is Dilbert. This is Dilbert, and he's having a conversation. If we go to our first panel, he's on the phone. We see him on the phone and he's speaking to someone and he says, I tried to fax it, but our fax machine is broken. He continues on the phone. I would send it by modem, but my communication software is incompatible with my new system software upgrade. Continuing on the phone. No, our electronic mail systems are incompatible. And then he asks a question. Mail it. So it can appear that the person he's speaking to, the listener, may have asked, well, why don't you mail it? And he says, mail it. And his response, we're not seeing him in the screen, but we're getting his response. I've only got one copy and our copier is out of toner. He continues, based probably on the response of his listener. Well, normally I could print another one, but our LAN is being rewired. And then he concludes, he says, well, I could just read it to you. And he begins to read this message that he was attempting to send out. And this is what the message is. I describe how technology improves our lives by, and then we have our 3 dots, our ellipses. And he says, yeah, I'll hold, because the person on the other end asks him to hold a minute, or to hold on. He says, yeah. He pauses in what he is saying, and he says, yeah, I'll hold. And then we have, hello, followed by, dang. And this tells us that the person on the other line has hung up. So let's look at what our questions are based on this type of prompt, but make sure when you get something like this, you go through it in detail, identify what is going on, and even before we look at the question, we see here in the first panel, fax machine broken. The modem, the communication software is incompatible. Then you have electronic mail system, and that is our email. His email, incompatible. Attempt to mail it, well, one copy, copier out of toner. He can't print it because the LAN is being rewired. So what we are seeing here, we have examples of different forms of technology. And in each case, something is wrong and the technology is not working. But the information to be articulated speaks about how technology improves our lives. But the technology is frustrating this process. So let's look at the questions. The context of communication mentioned above is what? Now, when we talk here about context of communication, is what type of environment this communication is related to. Is it public, interpersonal, organizational, or academic? Our public context, if you're doing public speaking, you're sharing information in a public forum, that's public context. Intrapersonal, you're going to find that may be happening within a group of people and so on. It's intrapersonal, it could be one-on-one or within the group. Organizational, C, speaks of within a company or business organization. D, academic, speaks of an educational setting. When we looked at our prompt, we see that our character is wearing a tie. He is speaking about these elements of technology that are normally associated with an office setting. And he's trying to get this information across to someone. And we can conclude that C is our answer. We're talking here about organizational. 34. The breakdown in communication is caused by what? A, jargon. B, geographical factors. C, technical factors. D, the lack of attention on the part of the receiver. If we go through our options, jargon has to do with the language that is specific to specific language that we associate with different fields of operation. So we did not really see a breakdown in communication based on jargon. Everything that he said was not working. The listener knew what it was and was trying to give another option. Geographical factors, yes, while they may be in separate locations, if the technology was working, they would not have had a problem. Can send it. C, technical factors. We identified all these different areas of technology that they were having problems with. And then D, the lack of attention on the part of the receiver. The receiver was listening until the speaker began to read what the article or what the document was about. So if you selected C, technical factors, this is the reason for the breakdown in communication. The main device used to illustrate the communication breakdown is what? And this here is talking, and when they say main device, when you see device, when we talk about language and communication, we are talking here about our literary devices. We are not talking about a cell phone device or a technological device. And again, when you look at the options that you've been presented with, your options are telling you we're talking here about literary devices. Our devices are literary. The main device used to illustrate the communication breakdown is A, irony, B, sarcasm, C, humor, or D, puns. When you look at the options and you select, again, you need to know what each one means, but pay attention again to what the prompt was. What was taking place in that prompt? We saw a breakdown in every aspect of technology that that company had, but the information to be transmitted was speaking about how technology can improve your life. This is an example of irony. You're saying one thing, but your situation indicates another. So if you selected A, that would be correct. So we're going to look at a few questions that could come in the later part of your exam paper that is based on a prompt looking at speaking and writing. Your communication studies teacher has assigned an expository speech to the class. Speeches are to be presented by each student to the entire group in 1 week. All of you are supposed to be very familiar with this type of situation because it's part of your exam. It is your internal assessment, and this is what you would have had to do for your teacher. Now, each speech should aim to do what? When we look at the prompt, be careful. It says the teacher has assigned an expository speech. An expository speech is for one main purpose. It's always going to inform. It is not trying to persuade, it's not trying to entertain, it is aimed at informing. So your options here, each speech should aim to entertain the listeners, and we know exposition is not about entertaining. Edify the listeners. Well, what does edify mean? C says recount an experience to the listener. What does recount mean? And then D says change the listener's point of view. If we're talking about changing point of view, this is persuasion. When you're trying to change someone's point of view, your aim there is to persuade. If you are recounting an experience to the listener, you're telling a story. You're telling a story, and stories are aimed at entertaining. But when we talk about edifying, when you edify, you are aiming to inform. To edify is to enrich the knowledge that someone would have had. You've added to their knowledge, and you do this through edification. So our answer here is B. Each speech should aim to edify the listeners because it's an expository speech. The speech is based on the changes in education technology over the past 20 years. The main organizational strategy that should be implemented is, and again, it's main organizational strategy. Two things you're paying attention to here. One, we're talking about the main one, and we kept talking about it. When we speak about the main, it means that there may be answers that are likely, but it's not the best answer. There will be an answer that is better. And then we talk about organizational strategy. You need to remember what are your organizational strategies, especially for the purposes of writing. The other thing I want to draw your attention to is, it says the speech is based on changes in education technology over the past 20 years. This is key to having you answer this question. Past 20 years. So it tells you you're going to be looking at a timeline. And if it's a timeline, you're looking at what took place here, then there, then elsewhere. So when we look at paragraphing, while paragraphing is a good strategy, when we look at order of importance as a good strategy, because we are using a timeline looking at the past 20 years, we are talking here about chronological order. That is the main organizational strategy that you would have to use for a speech like this. Classification can come in handy, but it's not as important as our chronological order. One nonverbal message that could demonstrate to your audience that you are confident in presenting your speech is what? Nonverbal message. How do we indicate to our listeners that you're confident about what you're doing? Is it through sustained eye contact, use of direct appeal to the audience, use of statistics, or use of graphics? You can use all of these and still not be confident. To me, one of the things I look at as being the true measure of confidence when you're addressing an audience is your ability to maintain eye contact with who you're speaking with. If you're speaking but you're constantly looking down, or you're looking away from who you're speaking to, who you're addressing, that is an indication of your discomfort and lack of confidence with what it is you're presenting. So always remember, sustained eye contact, and this does not mean you're just staring at them, but you want to be able to maintain a very sound level of eye contact. 39. While delivering his speech, Steve realizes that the audience is not paying attention. One communicative behavior members of the audience may use that may tell him this. And this is straightforward. Again, we are talking here, and notice we're talking about the communicative behavior. What are those things that people are doing that tell you what they feel or what they think? Because people can tell you specifically using verbal means how they feel and how they think. But when we talk about the communicative behavior, what are those actions? What are those nonverbal cues that indicate to you that the audience is not paying attention? And we know these. What tells us that someone is not listening to us? So, yawning frequently, nodding, leaning forward, uncrossed hands. We know that when people are not paying attention, one of the things that they can do is begin to fall asleep. And a precursor to the falling asleep is yawning. So if you're addressing an audience and you see more than one person yawning, or even one person, you know that they may be zoning out of what you're saying. One audiovisual aid that may enhance the audience's interest in his speech is. So how can you recapture this audience? Through A, colorful posters, B, flyers, C, a video clip, D, song. And we're talking here about audio visual. What does this tell us? It has to be both auditory, the audience must be able to hear something, and it must also be visual. They have to see something. Colorful posters, visual. Flyers are visual. The video clip is audio-visual. A song is audio. So that we can tell clearly that if you want to recapture this sleeping audience attention, one of the best ways to do that is through a video clip with an audio-visual means. So, as we've come to the end, students should have been able to respond to a variety of multiple choice questions based on communication studies content with success. Our hope throughout this entire journey and this process with you is that you have been able to clearly understand what's expected of you as you prepare for your communication studies exam. We do look forward to being able to help you and to continue with you on your journey through academic success. And we ask you to keep tuned in to the Tobago House of Assembly Division of Education, Innovation and Energy e-learning program. Goodbye.